All right, very excited about this one today. We're going to be comparing the Darkglass Legacy Preamp to the LHZ. And to be clear, this isn't a good or bad or which one's better or worse sort of comparison. I think we all spend a lot of time trying to decipher marketing jargon and subjective opinions from people online, but then trying to dovetail that with our own playing style, our own signal chain, our own amp settings, our genre of music, and even how we play is difficult to try and translate that and understand what the differences between preamps are. So the purpose of this comparison is really to go through and give us a easier way to understand the EQ and dynamics and harmonics that are a result of a preamp design, so you can make a better choice for what preamp is right for you. So let's quickly go over the methodology of how we do this. The first part is a stress test where we take a sweep signal that goes from 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz, and we send that to the preamp at different levels, everything from a soft playing level to what I would call abusively aggressive playing levels. When you're looking at this on the screen, we'll be looking at this in RX11, so on the right-hand side, you will see the soft playing level, and on the left-hand side, you will see the very heavy playing level. And this allows us to see how the frequency response and dynamics change with the playing performance. And this gives us a really good feel for what the feel of the preamp is when you're playing it. The audio samples are actually recorded directly from a set of 40 P5 and 40J pickups. And these are calibrated to be played into the preamps at exactly the same level that the preamp would see them. This allows us to be very objective in our testing. Instead of hearing the differences between the preamps and the difference in the performance, we're giving each preamp exactly the same performance. So the only difference you're going to hear is the differences in the preamp. All right, section 1, loopback and flat EQ testing. For this set, both preamps are going to be set with all their EQs set at center detent, and the intent is really to understand what is the preamp doing before we do any EQ changes on it. This is our baseline. This is the signal with no preamp and a wire bypass, and you'll notice that the volume level is consistent across each sweep. It doesn't vary, and the spectrogram just shows the fundamental frequencies. So when we switch to the LHZ, we don't really see much of a change. The levels are consistent all across, and there's no EQ being applied. Now, no preamp is, of course, perfect, and you'll see as we get toward the left side of the screen, where we're hitting it with some very heavy levels, you'll see that the volume levels start to waver a little bit, and that's part of the preamp design. And we'll talk about that as we get into a little bit later. But if you look at the right side, the level is perfectly flat all across, and this is what we expect. The LHZ is a unity gain preamp, meaning when it's at center detent, it's exactly the same level with no EQ applied. The output signal coming out of that preamp is the same as the signal going into it. Now, when we change over to the tone capsule, we see something very different. We see a treble boost here, and this is actually a 6 dB treble boost with a 1.1 kilohertz shelf. And this makes the tone capsule significantly brighter right out of the box. And it's important to remember as we go through the remainder of the test that this is the baseline for that preamp. Every other adjustment is going to go on top of this already built-in treble boost that it has. Section 2, flat EQ audio comparison. So we're going to listen to 3 samples here. Hard picking, some soft plucking, and then a little bit of tapping. And these give you a good range of different tones that we can compare the sounds as they go through the preamp. We're going to play a sample from the baseline, from the LHZ, and then the tone capsule. And you'll want to listen to this with a good set of headphones or speakers and really pay particular attention to the attack of the notes. So the first thing we notice is that the LHZ is nearly identical to the raw loopback signal. And this is expected. The LHZ is a unity gain preamp, so when it's at center detent, the output is identical to the input. So this is what we expect. The tone capsule is actually very crispy, particularly on the hard picking and the tapping sections where those transient details comes out. Those are really peak out above the rest of the signal. Okay, section 3, bass and treble boost. This is really the meat and potatoes of the comparison because this is the one where we really get a good sonic fingerprint of these preamps. We do this test with both the bass and treble boosted all the way. On the tone capsule, that'll be the bass and the high mid boosted 100%. And this really allows us to see the EQ dynamics and harmonic overtones that make up that sonic fingerprint. So looking at the LHZ first, we'll see that this is a basic treble shelf at 1.2 kilohertz, and it gives us a 14 dB cut and boost, and a bass shelf at 110 hertz, again with 14 dB cut and boost. The LHZ has a unique design. It boosts the treble 14 dB before it goes into the EQ system, and then reduces it by 14 dB after it gets out of the EQ. This causes those very high frequencies to hit the EQ at much higher levels than the fundamentals, causing saturation for the high frequencies. We can see the impact of this in RX11. At the far right side, where we have a soft performance, it's just a very clean EQ with a bell curve. There's a single fundamental line, and the wave shows a bell curve boosting bass and treble. As we move to the left, we start to see more and more overtones come in, and that bell curve turns into a peak bump. And this is because of those high frequencies being saturated and not being able to be amplified much more. So now let's switch over to the tone capsule. The tone capsule has a different EQ profile. The high-mid control is a peak control at 3.5 kilohertz, and it gives us a 14 dB of cut and boost. And the bass control is a shelving control at 127 hertz, giving us 18 dB of cut and boost. The high-mid control is a very narrow EQ. And this makes sense because the preamp already has a permanent treble boost. There are minimal overtones through the entire range from soft performance to heavy performance. We'll see the fundamental and a couple little faint overtones there, but there's no additional overtones as the dynamics get harder, and this tells us that there's no soft tube-like saturation on this. This is a clean EQ until we hit the ceiling. And speaking of the ceiling, when we get to the very far left-hand side, we see where that happens, where that extreme treble boost finally hits the ceiling and it just has a hard top and gives us those hard overtones. So headphones on and let's listen to this one together. So the tone capsule is very crispy in this one, and this is expected. It already has a 6 dB of treble boost, and then we just added 14 dB of a very narrow band 3.5 kilohertz boost on top of that. The tone capsule feels very peaky at these settings, where the pick attack and the tapping are much louder. They pop through much louder than the remainder of the notes. Looking at the wave file portion, we can actually see that difference. On the LHZ, these high frequencies are saturating the circuit, so it's acting like tube compression, but only on those transients. This keeps the volume levels in line with the rest of the performance, so as we look at the waveform, we don't see that peaky treble. On the tone capsule, we're not saturating those transients. It's a very clean EQ, so they're getting boosted by that extreme treble, and we'll see these peaks rising far above the normal playing levels. All right, section 5, mid boost. So looking at the LHZ first, we have a mid-range at around 750 hertz, and that's a plus or minus 14 dB cut and boost. On the tone capsule, we have the low mid coming in at 560 hertz, and again, a plus or minus 14 dB. There's really not a whole lot difference here. They both provide 14 dB of cut and boost, so let's go ahead and listen to these. This test is with the bass and treble controls flat and the mid-range controls boosted. So headphones on, and let's listen to these together. So there's nothing really different here besides the frequency ranges. There's really no dynamic differences. It's just mid-range EQ. And to be clear, the LHZ does have selectable mid-range settings. It goes from 413 Hz up to 750. I've opted only to use the default 750 because there really wasn't much value in listening to multiple samples of that, because it's just mid-range EQ. There's no other differences between these. Section 7, 18-volt operation. This is going to be a very brief overview with no sound samples. So looking at the LHZ, if we toggle back and forth between the 9-volt and the 18-volt setting, we'll see that there's no volume change. If you look at the right-hand side, those waveforms are exactly the same. As we look toward the left-hand side, where we have more dynamics, we'll see a change there. We'll see that there's more headroom on the 18 volts, so you have to play harder before those overtones come in. It also takes longer for that bell curve to turn into a peak curve, and this really speaks to the fact that the LHZ has that soft tube-like saturation, and going to 18 volts just raises that ceiling before you hit it. When we flip over the tone capsule, we do see that there is a slight volume boost across the board of about 1 dB. This isn't significant, but it is slightly different. There's no change in the dynamics because there's no soft saturation here. The only difference is the ceiling. When that treble is clipping on the far left-hand side, the ceiling is a little bit higher. So, what does all this tell us? Well, first off, the tone capsule is I would say the polar opposite of the Legacy. Where the Legacy cut treble and felt like a darker preamp, the tone capsule boosts the treble and is a very bright preamp. Likewise, where the Legacy does have that sort of saturation, tube-like saturation effect, similar to the HasLabs and the LHZ, the tone capsule is a very clean preamp with no saturation. The high mids on the tone capsule are a very narrow frequency range that can poke through a mix, but it can easily become harsh if it's over-applied. By comparison, the harmonic overtones on the LHZ are part of the circuit design. The high frequencies are saturated in a tube-like manner, so they don't reach as high, and it keeps them from being peaky, but the added harmonics make sure they're still heard in the mix. The surprising find that even when cutting the high mids on the tone capsule, there was still a lot of treble boost on this. And this could make changing to or from the tone capsule a little jarring. For example, if you've been using the tone capsule for a long time and your entire signal chain and amp is set on that sound, changing out that preamp for any other preamp, it's going to sound dark. It's going to be a bit of adjustment. Likewise, if you've been using another preamp for a long time and you put in the tone capsule, it's going to make that bass very bright. The tone capsule is a very highly regarded preamp, and for good reason. It's a very clean preamp with a bright tone, and it will take a dark instrument and bring it out so it can be heard in the mix. Again, this isn't about which preamp is better. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. It's really about understanding the design differences so you can make the best choice for yourself and for your tone. So I hope this helps you, and until next time, see ya.